You can either give life or take life by the words you use. So you got to be very careful now with this emotional power. You got to use it very wisely. Well-chosen words, yes. But now we need measured emotion and well-chosen words. Words not only give life, words kill. So since words are that powerful mixed with emotion, here's what's important. Next line, learn to measure your emotions. Because if you don't do that, you can do more damage than good. With words, you can kill someone's incentive. You can kill someone's dignity. But words loaded with emotion, it's so powerful, but you got to measure it. Words can work miracles. One is having something good to say. Number two is saying it well. Let me give you a quick list on saying it well. Number one, sincerity. Best place to start if you want to communicate well is let your sincerity show. Next is repetition, the mother of skill. I've been at this 33 years. Someone says, well, you give a pretty good seminar. I should. 33 years? 33 years! Repetition. Next, brevity. Sometimes you don't need many words if you're totally sincere, I'm telling you. Jesus' presentation in gathering up his team called disciples was fairly short. He just walked around the countryside, took a look at somebody and said, you follow me. That's brief. I mean, that's short. Now, why could he get by with such few words? And this takes care of a lot that I've tried to share with you today called personal development. Here's why I think Jesus could get by with such few words. For all that he was, that he didn't have to say. Take that scenario home. For all that I am, that I don't have to say. Just a few words could be dynamic in affecting someone else's life, a child, a business colleague, a sales client. Next, vocabulary. Got to work on your vocabulary. Some of my friends took a survey among prisoners working on some rehabilitation program. They weren't particularly looking for this, but here's what they found. There's definitely a relationship between vocabulary and behavior. And here's what they found out. The more limited the vocabulary, the more tendency to poor behavior. And when you think about it for a while, it makes sense. Words are a way of seeing. And if you don't have a good vocabulary, you can't see very well. Can you imagine the mistakes in judgment when you can't see very well? Next, words are a way of expressing what's going on in your head, what's going on in your heart. What if you can't see well and you can't express well? You can imagine the tragic scenario of 5 years of that, 10 years of that, 20 years of that showing no improvement. Behavior now becomes a major problem. And that person's world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Why? They can't see and they can't express. And finally, they don't need much bigger place than a 10 by 12 cell. Their world is so small anyway, don't need much bigger place. I'm asking you to stretch your vocabulary. I used to put words up on a 3 by 5 card. I drove a lot back in those days, but at the end of the day, I'd mastered 2 or 3 words. My oldest daughter, Linda, with my grandkids, starts the day with what's called the word for the day. She writes it on a chalkboard, the word for the day. And the kids memorize that word and the meaning of the word. And every once in a while during the day, she'll say, what's the word for the day? The last day I was there, the word was superficial. Natalie's 4, Nathaniel's 5. And several times during that day, Linda, my daughter, would say, what's the word for the day? Natalie would say, superficial. And she would say, Nathaniel, what does that mean? On the surface. Several times during the day. What's the word for the day? Superficial. What does it mean? On the surface. If you were to ask my grandkids, the last time Grandpa was here, what was the word for the day? I'll bet you they'd probably know. Superficial. On the surface. Why not learn a word a day? Why not add to your vocabulary so you can see more, see better, and express better? Put out in words what's in your heart, what's in your soul, what's in your mind. So say it well. Here's number 3. Number 1 was have something good to say. Number 2, say it well. Here's number 3, read your audience. These are just simple concepts now. You got to add some of the details, but that's what I'm mainly good for, is concepts. Read your audience. If you're talking to a child, you got to study the face of the child. You got to study a little body language. You got to study what's going on. So you'll know whether to shift gears, come on a little stronger, ease off a little, might be too strong, search for another illustration, soft, strong. A lot of that is dictated by reading your audience. When I first started lecturing, I had some challenges here. I was so absorbed in my notes, lecturing like this. I'm telling you, in those early days, the audience could have left and I'd have kept right on going. I didn't know what was going on down here. I didn't know what was going on over here. I didn't have any idea what was happening over here. Whether I should come on a little stronger, ease back. I didn't know. I couldn't read my audience. So, read your audience. The spirit, power, and emotion with which you translate your communication. Intensity gives power to vocabulary. Words are just words, but here's what's powerful. Words loaded with emotion. See, that's what's powerful. You say, is the word powerful? Yes, the word's powerful, but the emotion is so much more powerful. It's different reading the word bastard in the dictionary and have somebody call you one. If a word is a word, say, no, a word just isn't a word. It all depends, right? It depends. So, emotion is like, if I took a little straight pin, right? Guy buys a shirt, it's got all these pins in it, right? You got to take out all these pins. If I took one of these little straight pins and I threw it at you, and it hit you in the face or the hands, you'd feel it, this little straight pin. But what if I took that little straight pin and wired it to the end of an iron bar about this long? See? And I let you have it with that, I could drive the pin through your heart. So the little pin is the words and the iron bar is the emotions that give the words power, gives the words weight, that makes it strike the consciousness. The day the Christian church was started, it said this unique sermon was preached. And the sermon was so powerful, it said, it struck their conscience. It struck their consciousness. And your words can become so powerful, it can strike somebody's consciousness, and they say, oh, wow. Now I know what I did wrong. Now I understand the difficulty. Now I can see. And words can become that powerful that they strike the heart, they strike the mind, they strike the consciousness, so that somebody can see. Too much firepower destroys the opportunity. We say we don't shoot a cannon at a rabbit. That's too much firepower. It's effective, but you got no more rabbit, right? We're talking now about being effective. Here's the key, enough emotion. Now, the men have to work on enough, and probably the female side has to work on a bit of restraint. The men, a bit more, enough, and the women, not too much. And we all have to measure that, whether it's in our business, whether it's in sales, or whether it's speaking to a child, enough but not too much. I mean, this, you can't believe what a little bit of course on this stuff will do in helping you to sense some things you didn't sense before, see some things you didn't see before, and pick up some signals you never picked up before by just paying attention. Now your effectiveness multiplies by 2, by 3, by 5, by 10. It's fabulous. This is fabulous stuff. Now, what is the intensity? It's the blend of all your emotions and all your experiences that have affected you. The key is to keep and store those so that they're handy and near the surface. Because here's the next key now in making a presentation, having a conversation. Number 1, identification. If you have available to you all of your experiences close at hand, now you can identify with someone. Here's what identification means: making yourself real to someone else, hopefully in the very beginning. If a man talks to a man, that's a pretty easy identification. If a man talks to a woman, a lot more difficult. If we're the same, if we're sort of the same, it's a lot easier to identify. Here's what identification means: building a bridge between you and someone else by relating some common experiences. You start with that. But now how does an adult 40 relate to a child of 12? That's a long bridge from 40 to 12. How would you do that to get a child's attention? How would you do that to build a bridge so you could have a good conversation? Here's one of the keys. Remember when you were 12. You just got to go back and see if you can't pick up the threads of your own experience so that you can now relate to somebody that's 12, a teenager. Man and woman, totally opposite, but if I've been lost and you've ever been lost, if we talked about that, I'll bet that would identify. Have you ever been lost? And she says, yeah, I remember being lost. I remember when I was lost. Now we've got something in common. if I've got children and you've got children, even though I'm a father and you're a mother. But at least if we have children, we have something in common. Little things you can think of that helps to build a bridge fairly quickly between you and someone so that you have a better chance now to communicate well. We call this simply identification. Next, key to good communication is learn to attack the problem but not the person. This is an art. Too often we attack the person that is so closely identified with the problem, but the key is to attack the problem. We expect the doctor not to attack the patient, but we expect the doctor to attack the disease, to attack the problem, to make the operation successful, save the patient. So here's what we expect a doctor to be: very professional. Matters of the heart are delicate. You can't operate on the heart with a hatchet. If you were about to go under for the heart operation and you heard the doctor say, "Hand me the hatchet," you'd come awake. We're talking about my heart here. No, and some people go after matters of the heart with a hatchet. Right? Too severe. They're not careful enough to handle the problem, to go after the problem. But the key is to save the patient. And this is why you have to use this language even with your children. I love you, but I hate what's happening. I don't hate you. And if you learn to deal with your kids that way, they'll appreciate what you hate as long as they know what you love and what you hate. And sometimes you just got to say it. You got to make it clear. I don't hate you, but I hate what's going on. I hate what I see. I hate what's happening. I don't feel good about it. I feel good about you, but not about it. See, if you make it clear, that kind of communication is so useful. It is so powerful. Now, here's one of the best ways to attack a problem, and that's to confess you've got it or that you've had it. Say, Mary, the reason I'm talking to you about this is I'm telling you, I've been through it, and I made some wrong decisions. Let me tell you what it carved out of my life that I'll never get back. One of the best illustrations is to use yourself. If you're getting on somebody's case, say, hey, I remember somebody got on my case and saved the day. If that person hadn't come along, got on my case, told it like it was, give it to me straight, I'm telling you, I'd have been lost, I'd have been gone, wouldn't be here to talk to you. So listen to me from my own experience. See, that kind of communication is so valuable. Now, here's another way to attack a problem. Use an illustration of a person that isn't there. So let me tell you about John, Joe. John said, oh well, sure enough. I'm telling you, he regrets to this day his oh well attitude. And if John was here, he'd tell you himself. But since he isn't here, let me tell you about John. If John was here, he would plead with you with tears in his eyes. See, that third party. First, you confess your own sins, the mistakes you made, what you went through to help someone. Then you use a third party, another illustration for someone that isn't there, instead of direct. Okay. Then when there's no hope left, you can use the direct attack. Here's what we call this: tools of last resort. They are useful, but you got to be very careful using tools of last resort. Here's the first one: a direct attack. You. No illustration, no third party, you. See, now you got to be very careful when you go direct, because now confrontation is always, it's difficult. It can be so helpful. It can save the day. It can rescue somebody from disaster, but you've got to know what you're doing when you go for the direct attack. Because now you may destroy your chances forever to get back into a conversation with a person if you destroy it this time. You got to do it. You got to do it strong, and you got to do the direct attack, but you got to do it in such a way that the door is still open in this communication effort. A direct attack. Here's another tool of last resort: scolding. You got to be very careful of scolding. It may be necessary, but only as a tool of last resort. It's not something you use up front. Use yourself as an illustration. Confess yourself and for someone else. Then if there's no hope left, then you go for the direct attack. Somebody walks in late and you say, where have you been? See, that's loaded. That's loaded with insinuation. And yes, finally it might be time to use it. Finally, there isn't any other way. And you got to resort to it. But you got to be careful of these tools of last resort. Don't use them up front. Only use them as a last resort. Because when you say, where have you been? See, that insinuates all kinds of things. You don't care. Insinuation, if it's necessary, is important, but if it isn't necessary, it's important to leave it out. Old Joe Kennedy taught John Kennedy, who became president, one important phrase. Here it is, and it applies in so many ways, so jot it down. If it is not necessary to change, it is necessary not to change. If it is not necessary to use strong language, it's necessary not to use strong language. If it's not necessary to scold, then it's necessary not to scold. You can't just use it because you're good at it. Or just because, something flared up and you just let it fly. You can only use it because it's absolutely necessary. And if it is not necessary to scold, it is necessary not to scold. Tools of last resort. Some parents scold their children all day long. Scolding is like getting someone's attention with a cut. And yes, it'll heal. With a cut. And yes, it'll heal. And yes, maybe this time it was necessary to scold. But what if you did that all day? Every day, all day. Next is sarcasm. There's a place for sarcasm. Who do you think you are? But see, you wouldn't use that up front. You wouldn't use it every day. You wouldn't use it very often. Now, there is a time to use it, but sarcasm, you got to be careful. A lot of things concerning human relations, you got to be careful. Here's one of the most important. Husband and wife have to be careful. Teasing. You got to be very careful. Because with teasing, it's too easy to cross the line to where teasing becomes cruelty. Even with children, you got to be careful teasing children. Children have to be careful teasing each other. Why? Because it's so easy to tip it just a little too far, and it's the beginning of cruelty. We say, well, we call it teasing. Say, no, some of it's the beginning of cruelty. Not ultimate cruelty, not devastating cruelty, but it could lead to that. So you got to be very careful. The human heart is very fragile. No matter how strong and powerful and loud the exterior may be, I'm telling you, that ain't true of what's going on inside. Everybody's consciousness and dignity and heart is a delicate matter. And you can do so many useful things, and you can have such an unbelievable success if you just follow a few of these little guidelines, especially on tools of last resort. Save it up. It's like profanity. The key is to save it up. If a guy swears and cusses all day, say, oh, don't mind John, he's just a cusser, right? I mean, we have to put up with his mouth all the time. But see, that's ineffective. But somebody that doesn't use profanity, I'm telling you, the day they do, the world stops. A mother screams every day. Finally, the kids just get used to it. Other kids come over to visit, and they say, don't mind Mama, she's just a screamer. She just screams all day long. But see, one day it might be fatal. The little 3-year-old is headed for the street, and the truck is coming. Mama screams. Doesn't mean anything. Because she's been screaming every day, all day. See, if she would have saved up her screams when the 3-year-old is headed for the street and she screams, the world stops. Wow. Mama doesn't scream that often. But when she does, it means something. What's the old story? Cry wolf, right? Too often. Just save it. Okay. So, with care, you can help so many people if you do it with care. Careful communication. Powerful, yes, but careful, yes. Next, on communication. The power of persuasion. Let's talk about that. We can present, but here's what the ultimate goal is in communication, is to persuade, not just to present. So what's the difference in presentation and persuasion? Let me give you just a few tips. Here's number 1, become a good storyteller. One of the great ways to persuade is to illustrate with a story. Pick up all the stories. Whether it's a story for a child, you got to have kids' stories. You're talking to teenagers, you got to have some teenage stories. Don't be lazy now in gathering these stories because they're so valuable in illustrating a point. stories, personal stories. You know, search around in your own life and say, here's a story I haven't told for a long time, or here's a story that, you know, I never could tell because when it happened, it was too fresh and too severe, but now I think I can tell that story. Don't be lazy in gathering up these stories so that when you're talking to a child, you got the stories. You talk to a teenager, you got the stories. When you talk to a woman, you got the stories. When you talk to a homemaker, you got the stories. No matter who you're talking to, you got stories, you got ways and means to illustrate your point. That's number one, be a good storyteller. Here's number two, accurate facts. If you're going to communicate, speak the truth. There's nothing more powerful than the truth. It sets everything free. It sets you free to give a strong testimonial, the truth. Especially in business, here's what you don't need, exaggeration. But it's unimportant, exaggeration. You say, well, I got to pad the numbers so it'll seem right. You say, no. Something will give you away in your voice. Somebody will also pick up those signals and say, those numbers don't sound right. Here's the important thing in business. Make sure it turns out to be easier than you said and more than you promised. Easier than you said and more than you promised. Exaggeration is the childish attempt to make up for lack of self-worth and self-confidence. There's nothing better than the truth. Elton John sings, she lived her life like a candle in the wind, never knowing who to cling to when the rains set in. See, it's hard to say it much better than that, how brief and fragile life really is. If two or three agree on a common purpose, nothing is impossible. It's like marriage. It's tricky, but it's powerful. There's nothing like it. Having children, isn't that a little tricky? Say, yes, but you got to go for it. You got to try the experience. Having a child is like a throw of the genetic dice. And you have no idea what's coming up. To see what? See if you can manage it. See if you can handle it. See if you can turn what is into what you wish to be. See if you can't influence and speak and use yourself as an influence over whatever happens, and see if you can make something unique out of it. Sure, it's a challenge. Sure, it's a win or lose. But what else is new? Sure, the possibilities. But the odds are in your favor. Here's the last part on communication, especially in the art of persuasion, and that's a passionate belief in something. Be passionate about being healthy. Be passionate about being influential. Be passionate about being extremely successful. Take whatever you've got and turn it into a successful, prospering, flourishing, exciting, financial, social, personal, spiritual life. Right? That's the passion. To be all that you can possibly be. Fueled with the fire of a passionate belief. It can be any experience or a collection of experiences that furnishes for you the fuel that puts that sparkle in your eye every day.